What do I have to do to marry you, human? The alien woman really wanted him. Dax Walker had just finished welding the last panel on a battered cargo hauler when the universe, in its infinite cruelty, decided to make his day far more interesting than he wanted it to be. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and leaned back against the ship's hull, eyeing his handiwork. Not bad. Considering the original damage looked like someone had taken a plasma cannon to the side, he'd actually managed to make it space-worthy again. "All right, she's good to go," he called out to the ship's owner, a nervous-looking Zenti merchant with more arms than patience. "Excellent, excellent," the Zenti chittered, rubbing two of his hands together while the other two tapped away on a datapad. "Payment has been transferred to your account. And might I say, Walker, you are one of the least incompetent mechanics I have encountered. This is high praise." Dax sighed, accepting the dubious compliment. Yeah, pleasure doing business. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need a drink." Port Osiris wasn't exactly the worst place in the galaxy, but it was close. A dingy, floating hunk of steel orbiting a dying star. The station was a haven for freelancers, smugglers, and people who really didn't want to be found. Dax fit into at least one of those categories. He headed toward the nearest bar, a charming little dive called the Rusted Wrench, and was halfway through ordering a drink when the atmosphere in the room shifted. Conversations trailed off. The air felt heavier. Dax turned, and that was when he saw her. She stood in the entrance, backlit by the harsh station lighting. Tall, broad-shouldered, covered in dark, obsidian-like armor, etched with intricate glowing symbols. A Askari warrior. High-ranking, if the insignia on her chest plate was anything to go by. Dax instinctively tensed. The Askari weren't known for casual visits. They were known for war, for conquest, for settling disputes with a blade rather than words. And for some insane reason, this one was striding directly toward him. "Dax Walker," she said, voice smooth but commanding. Dax blinked, pointing at himself. Me? You!" Her eyes were a piercing shade of emerald, glowing faintly. Dax swallowed. He'd seen that look before. Predatory, like a hunter assessing its prey. "Right," he said, shifting in his seat. "Listen, if this is about a repair job, I can fit you in next week. I charge extra for hull damage, though, so if you got into a scrap—" "I am not here for repairs," she interrupted. "Great," he said, "because my schedule is packed. Really, just overflowing with—" "You will be my mate," she declared. Dax choked on his drink. The entire bar went silent. Even the ambient hum of the station seemed to pause in shock. He coughed violently, thumping his chest. "What? You heard me?" "Yeah, I heard you. I just—" "What?" Sashara Vex did not look like someone prone to jokes. She carried herself with the unshakable confidence of a woman who had never once doubted herself in her entire life, which was deeply concerning because she also looked very, very serious. Dax cleared his throat, attempting a weak chuckle. "Okay, appreciate the enthusiasm, but pretty sure that's not how this works." "In Askari culture, it is," she said simply. "Well, in my culture, we usually start with dinner before lifelong commitments." "I have no need for human courtship rituals," she said, crossing her arms. "I have chosen you." Dax felt every eye in the bar on him. Somewhere to his right, he heard a snicker. "All right, great. Love that for you," he said. "But here's the thing. I'm not Askari, so I don't think the whole claiming thing applies here." Her gaze sharpened. "Do you reject me?" "Yes," he said, perhaps a little too quickly. Then realizing that might be an insult to a 7-foot-tall murder machine, he added, "Not that you're not, very impressive. Like, really. Just this whole mate thing feels a little rushed, you know?" Sashara tilted her head. "You may reject me by presenting 3 impossible trials." Dax blinked. "Come again?" She nodded. "If I fail, I shall release you." The bar collectively leaned in. Dax ran a hand down his face. Why is there always a catch? He racked his brain. The trick, clearly, was to make the challenges so absurd that even a warrior like her couldn't complete them. "All right, fine," he smirked. "Okay, you want impossible. Here you go. 1. Steal a warlord's flagship. 2. Tame a void beast. 3. Survive a duel against your own people. The room held its breath. Sashara regarded him for a long moment, and then she smiled. Dax felt a chill run down his spine. Done, she said. He frowned. What do you mean, done? I accept your challenge. I shall return when the trials are complete. She turned on her heel and strode out of the bar. Dax sat in stunned silence. Someone at the back let out a low whistle. Jorgo, a familiar scaly face among the crowd, slid into the seat beside him, grinning. You really should have just taken her to dinner, Walker. Dax groaned and dropped his head onto the table. I am so screwed. Dax Walker had spent the past week oscillating between a denial, mild panic, and an increasing urge to fake his own death. Sure, Sashara Vex was probably dead. His challenges were impossible. That was the whole point. You didn't just waltz into a warlord's stronghold and steal his flagship like it was an unattended speeder bike. You didn't just tame a void beast, and you sure as hell didn't fight an Askari warrior and live to tell about it. So logically, she had to be dead. That comforting thought lasted precisely 7 days and 12 hours before Port Osiris received an emergency broadcast that changed everything. Dax had been nursing a drink at the Rusted Wrench, trying to ignore the looks from the station regulars, when every single screen in the bar flickered to life. The overhead speakers crackled. A robotic voice, clearly belonging to someone trying very hard not to lose their mind, came through. This is an urgent bulletin from the Imperial News Network. Warlord Korak's personal flagship, the Unyielding Blade, has been stolen. Repeat, the Unyielding Blade has been stolen. The Warlord has issued a sector-wide bounty for the return of his vessel and the capture of the thief, who has been identified as... The video feed cut to a grainy security cam recording. Sashara Vex, in all her 7-foot battle-armored glory, stood on the bridge of the Unyielding Blade, hands on her hips, head tilted in a way that suggested mild amusement at the chaos unfolding around her. By the void, Jorgo muttered. She actually did it. Dax nearly fell out of his chair. How? No one had an answer, because how wasn't the issue anymore. The issue was that Sashara had completed the first impossible task, meaning she was now moving on to the second. Dax's stomach twisted. Okay, maybe she got lucky. Maybe she just, I don't know, found the warlord asleep and borrowed the ship while he wasn't looking. Jorgo gave him a flat look. You think a warlord misplaced his own flagship? I need to believe that. Well, you're not going to like this next part. Dax turned back to the screens just in time to see another update hit the news feeds. This just in, a void beast has been spotted near the derelict mall. It is not hostile. We repeat, the void beast appears to be tamed. Reports indicate it is accompanied by an Askari warrior. The bar erupted into chaos. Dax, on the other hand, had completely stopped functioning. His brain simply refused to process this level of nonsense. No, he said, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. You don't tame void beasts. They're hyper-evolved apex predators that exist outside of normal physics. Jorgo tapped at his datapad. Well, she named it, so... Dax snatched the datapad and stared at the newsfeed. Void beast spotted in Outer Rim, now responds to snuffles. He slapped a hand over his face. Why is this my life? The answer arrived 24 hours later, in the form of an incoming transmission. The holographic display flickered, and suddenly Sashara was standing in his workshop, arms crossed, an unmistakable look of satisfaction on her face. Dax Walker, she said, like they were just catching up after a casual weekend apart. He ran a hand down his face. Sashara, so nice to hear from you. How's life? Busy, I imagine. She smiled. It has been productive. Dax let out a strangled laugh. Yeah, I bet it has. What with the Grand Theft flagship and the Void Beast taming? That's... wow. Really impressive. Super illegal, but very impressive. Her eyes gleamed. I have completed 2 of your trials. Only 1 remains. Right, Dax said, voice cracking slightly. The duel. Sashara nodded. I have already issued my challenge. The fight is scheduled for tomorrow. Dax wanted to scream. He should have been celebrating. Sashara was about to fight one of her own kind. Askari warriors didn't duel to lose. They fought to win or die, which meant this was it, the final challenge. But there was a problem, a very, very big problem. Dax had been around Askari warriors before. He knew how they thought. He knew what Sashara was really like. And he knew, with a growing sense of horror, that she wasn't going to lose. She was going to win, which meant in less than 24 hours, Sashara Vex was going to return to Port Osiris, victorious, and claim him as her mate. Jorgo peered over his shoulder. "Well," he said, "on the bright side, at least she seems really into you." Dax groaned and banged his head against the table. He was so screwed. Dax Walker was experiencing what some might call an existential crisis. Others, perhaps less charitable, might just call it a really bad day. He sat at the bar in the Rusted Wrench, head in his hands, staring down at his untouched drink. Around him, the entire station was buzzing with gossip, because of course it was. You didn't just get chosen as a mate by an unstoppable Askari warrior and expect people to mind their own business. "So, Jorgo said, sliding into the seat beside him. "You heard the news?" Dax lifted his head just enough to glare. "Oh, which news, Jorgo?" "The fact that an Askari warrior is about to claim me like a prize? The fact that she stole a warlord's flagship, tamed a void beast, and is about to duel her own people because of me? Or the fact that my life is now a cautionary tale?" Jorgo tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I was actually going to mention the betting pool. Stations got you at 5-to-1 odds of caving and accepting the proposal." Dax groaned and thunked his forehead against the bar. Perfect, just perfect. The duel was set to begin in a few hours. Sashara had called out a fellow Askari warrior, a general no less, because of course she didn't pick some random grunt. No, she had to challenge someone with status, because winning wasn't enough. It had to be dramatic. "You do realize there's a non-zero chance she dies, right?" Jorgo asked. Dax swallowed. Yeah, he realized that. But somehow he wasn't comforted, because as much as he should have been rooting for Sashara to lose, the thought of her actually dying left an uneasy pit in his stomach. He wasn't that heartless. She'd gone through all this effort for him. Not that he asked her to, but still. And now in just a few hours, she'd either prove her worth or she'd die trying. Dax had a very bad feeling about which outcome was more likely. The duel was held in the station's combat arena, which was basically a converted cargo bay with reinforced walls and a strong disregard for workplace safety. The stands were packed. Even people who shouldn't have cared, merchants, freighter pilots, bounty hunters, had turned up just to see the fight. Dax stood near the back, arms crossed tightly, watching as Sashara stepped into the ring. Her opponent was massive, even bigger than she was, which Dax hadn't thought was possible. General Vectar. The guy was built like a war machine. His armor was heavier, more ornate, marking his rank. He sneered at Sashara as she approached. "You challenge me over a human?" He scoffed, voice thick with disdain. Sashara rolled her shoulders, expression unreadable. "I do." Vectar bared his fangs in a grin. "Then I will make this quick." Dax swallowed hard. He hated how much he wanted to shout something. "Run, change your mind. For the love of all that is holy, let's just talk about this." But Sashara had already drawn her weapon, a sleek, wickedly curved blade. Vectar did the same, and then the fight began, and it was vicious. Dax had seen plenty of fights before, but this was something else. Sashara didn't hesitate. She launched forward, a blur of motion, her blade clashing against Vectar's in a shower of sparks. The sound of metal on metal echoed through the arena. Vectar swung hard, trying to overpower her with sheer strength. Sashara danced around him, dodging with precision that didn't seem possible for someone in full armor. The crowd loved it. Cheers, shouts, even bets being placed mid-fight. Dax, meanwhile, was gripping the railing so tightly his fingers ached. Vectar went for a brutal downward strike. Sashara sidestepped at the last second, slamming an elbow into his side and kicking his knee out from under him. The general staggered. The mistake lasted half a second. Sashara took advantage. Her blade flashed, once, twice, before her opponent could recover. And then, just like that, it was over. Vector collapsed to his knees. His weapon clattered to the floor. A deep gash ran across his chest plate, his breathing heavy. Sashara stood above him, victorious. Dax stopped breathing. The arena erupted into noise, but he barely heard it, because now there was nothing left to stop her. She had won. She had won. And that meant... She turned her head, locking eyes with him across the arena. Dax's stomach dropped straight into the void. Jorgo clapped him on the shoulder. "Congrats, buddy. You're getting married." Dax let out a high-pitched laugh. "I need a drink." Dax Walker was not built for interstellar political drama. He was a mechanic. He liked engines, grease stains, and ships that didn't explode mid-flight. What he didn't like was standing in the middle of a crowded docking bay while an entire battalion of Askari warriors watched their newly victorious champion claim her prize. That prize, of course, being him. Sashara stood in front of him, exuding the smug confidence of someone who had just conquered a warlord's flagship, tamed a void beast, and defeated one of her own generals in combat, all in the name of romance. Dax, meanwhile, was actively considering how much paperwork it would take to fake his own death and start over on the outer rim. Sashara gestured to the gathered warriors. "You all bore witness to my trials. I have fulfilled the challenge given to me." She turned back to Dax, her emerald eyes alight with triumph. "You are mine now, human." The warriors cheered. Dax's mouth opened and closed a few times before he managed to find his voice. "Okay, South first of all. Wow. Just wow. Can we all take a moment to appreciate the intensity of this situation? Because, this has escalated so much farther than I ever expected." One of the warriors slapped him on the back hard enough to nearly dislodge his spine. "You are lucky. A champion has claimed you with honor." Dax wheezed. "That's one way to look at it." Sashara tilted her head. "You still resist? Even after all I have done?" Dax really didn't want to get murdered by an entire battle-hardened warrior species, so he chose his words very carefully. "I mean, resist is a strong word. I respect the effort, I respect the dedication, and I really respect your ability to accomplish literal impossibilities just to prove a point." He spread his hands. "But, I don't think marriage should be decided by a series of death-defying stunts." Sashara narrowed her eyes. "You set the terms." "Yeah," Dax groaned, running a hand down his face. "That was my first mistake." The Askari warriors did not look amused. Jorgo, who had apparently zero sense of self-preservation, cleared his throat and said, "I mean, you gotta admit, he's got a point. Relationships usually involve things like talking and getting to know each other before making legally binding commitments based on intergalactic space challenges." Sashara frowned. "Is this not how humans court one another?" Dax blinked. "No?" She looked genuinely surprised. "Strange. It is far more efficient," Jorgo snorted. "Can't argue with that. You really cut through the awkward dating phase." Dax buried his face in his hands. Sashara watched him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she let out a low chuckle. "I see now that I may have misunderstood your customs." Dax peeked up at her. "You think?" Sashara crossed her arms, studying him like he was a particularly confusing puzzle. "Then tell me, Dax Walker, what would you propose instead?" That was a good question. Dax had spent the past week desperately trying to avoid this outcome. But now that he was here, standing in front of her, he realized something he really didn't want to admit. He didn't hate the idea of getting to know her. Sure, she was terrifying. Sure, she was way out of his league. But she was also funny, determined, and had somehow managed to tame a void beast, which was undeniably cool. And the fact that she had done all this because she genuinely liked him, that was kind of flattering in a deeply unhinged way. Dax let out a long sigh. "Okay, look, maybe we don't start with marriage. Maybe we start with something a little less life-altering." Sashara raised a brow. "Like what?" "Like dinner, a date, something that doesn't involve me signing away my entire existence on the spot." The gathered warriors immediately looked displeased. There was muttering in the ranks. Something about dishonor and weak human traditions. Sashara, however, simply studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "A date, then," she said. I will allow you this compromise. Dax let out the biggest sigh of relief. Great. Fantastic. See, this is progress. Jorgo leaned over. You do realize you just agreed to date a woman who stole a warlord's ship, befriended an apex predator, and defeated a battle-hardened general in hand-to-hand combat, right? Dax exhaled. Yeah. You sure you want to get involved with that? Dax glanced up at Sashara, who was now casually fending off congratulatory backslaps from her warriors with one hand, while scrolling through something on her datapad with the other. The void beast she had tamed, Snuffles, was loitering nearby, watching Dax with glowing violet eyes that suggested if you hurt her, I will eat you and not even feel bad about it. Dax rubbed his temples. I think I lost control of my life somewhere along the way. Jorgo clapped him on the back. Oh, buddy, you definitely did. Later that evening, as he sat across from Sashara at a small corner booth in one of the station's less questionable diners, Dax realized something shocking. He was actually enjoying himself. Sashara, for all her intensity, was interesting. She had stories, insane stories, about her time in the Askari military. She had opinions on ship engineering, some of them surprisingly good, a love of spicy food and an unexpected fondness for terrible human comedy vids. Somehow, against all odds, she was fun. And as the night went on, Dax found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Sure, he was technically still on the run from a warlord, and sure, he had a very real fear that Snuffles was just waiting for an excuse to eat him. But Sashara was smiling at him, and maybe, just maybe, he was smiling back.